My name is Sander, and I'm a big fan of coffee, cocoa, and the climate. And since you're watching, I'm going to bet that you are too. When you're like us, you love talking about how we can produce all the commodities we love so much while remaining within our planetary boundaries. This month in the Carblecast we're doing it slightly different, and I've asked my colleague Robert Jan to present 3 episodes about the European deforestation regulation. Robert Jan, take it away.
The EU deforestation regulation brings monumental changes in the industry. Companies need to prove that they are deforestation free or they face hefty fines. And because we're only 12 months away, we decided to make 3 episodes that focus on how the industry is responding toward the EUDR. For this first EUDR episode, I talked with Michael Wienhold. Michael is a trader and sourcing specialist at Rehm Co. And Rehm Co is a specialty coffee importer based in Hamburg, and they source coffee throughout the coffee belt. With Michael, I talked about the negative responses that he sees in the industry. We also talked about how smallholders have the chance of being left out of the supply chain due to the implications of the EUDR. But we also touched on the subject of complex origins like Ethiopia and Uganda, where coffee is not that traceable. And although Michael sees lots of challenges, he also spots opportunities for the industry to move forward. This was my talk with Michael.
So how do you see the industry responding to the EUDR within the coffee and cocoa sectors and industries?
I think the initial response of the industry regarding to the EUDR, at least from what I understand, was quite negative. I think there was both at origin, but also here in consuming countries, producing countries, so where the roasters are located, quite the negative response. I think, if I remember correctly, Brazil was throwing words around like neo-colonialism, the EU forcing them to do or apply standards that they have not been talked about enough. I think if you see roasters here, their fear was a bit that their competitive advantage might go away with these new regulations. I do feel that the initial response, the negative response, is mainly coming from a fact that, unfortunately, coffee is not a sector that is free of things like corruption. You have a great amount of illegal movement of coffees crossing green borders, right? So from neighboring origins. I know a case in Kenya where a lot of coffee from Rwanda was crossing green borders into Kenya because the price of Kenyan coffee was simply higher. But the same was in Central America with Honduras. So now with the EUDR, when it becomes clear which plot of land is being used for how many kilos of coffee, for example, it becomes evident that there has been a mismatch in those numbers. And I do think that might have been a reason for the initial quite negative reaction.
If you look at the law, what are your practical concerns about the EUDR?
I think my main practical concern about the EUDR is related to capacity. I feel that if you have major players in coffee, be it at origin, but also roasters or importers, it comes down to the way they are able to adapt to these new laws, the EUDR specifically. I think that if you have a team of, let's say, 20 people that are focusing only on sustainability, only on implementing the new EUDR, you have a great advantage compared to a company or organization that only has 1 or 2 people. And I think here, on our side of the world, we have support of things like government bodies that help us set up these programs. We have startups that are coming up that are helping us. But if you look at origin, especially East Africa, I fear is an origin that will, I hope not, but I do see quite some difficulties in locating smallholder farmers that have maybe 5, 10 coffee trees in their backyard, and they're not regularly supplying the same washing stations, but they might be going here or there depending on where they're getting paid more. Ethiopia, Rwanda, I think those kind of origins will have the greatest challenge when it comes to the EUDR. And I fear that the smaller individuals, companies, organizations are going to be left behind, or that there's a consolidation of a market down the road where big actors are able to absorb smaller ones because they can't keep up.
Yeah, I share similar thoughts about what you just said. Which initiatives of certain companies do you admire, and what are they specifically doing, if you have some examples?
I think initiatives that I admire from companies that I've seen tackling the EUDR, as I was mentioning, you have startups. There's Carblecast, for example, that does an incredible job in supporting everyone that is involved in the EUDR, not only, let's say, in coffee, but in all the commodities. Teaming up with satellite image companies and research behind biodiversity and implementing premiums. I think that is a great initiative. I think a startup that we're working with is Sunhead, which is a startup focusing on being able to cope with all the compliance issues of the future by implementing them onto an online solution which adapts and learns. And the way they have been reacting to EUDR, that they've been now implementing tools that allow us to collect data on an automatic basis. I think that is helping us a lot. But I do also feel that at Origin, you have origins that are accepting the EUDR coming into place and being ahead of everyone else by providing that information already when you purchase, in this case, coffee. But also importers, I think, are using the EUDR to their advantage to be able to already provide all the information that is necessary, even though the EUDR is not in effect yet. I think this will give them a competitive advantage down the road. And I do think that is the initial reaction that I would have wanted to see. Accepting and moving forward and being a professional in the area rather than complaining and thinking that it will not affect you down the road.
From a coffee and cocoa industry perspective, what advice would you give to the Commission, to the EU Commission, of what they can do better or design better laws?
I think the advice that I would give the EU Commission as they design new laws or regulations such as this is looking at the initial negative reaction from both origin and consuming countries, that they should involve key players throughout the supply chain or throughout several supply chains. Obviously, it affects more than just coffee. In order to sharpen these laws, depending on the commodity that is being traded. I feel that if you put everything under one umbrella, you have disadvantages in areas where other commodities might not have a disadvantage in, because they're simply being traded differently or grown differently or produced differently, or even refined differently. And I think the initial reaction has shown me that the EU Commission needed to implement this probably without as many people as they would have wanted to ask, in order to get something done. And I respect that a lot, because otherwise you would have probably had so many opinions that would just hinder any kind of regulation. I understand from the reaction, though, that a lot of these people would have appreciated at least some form of input in order to give their ideas on how to do it. I think the fear of them not accepting it and not wanting to do it is not really there. I think everyone knows, especially on this side of the world, that if we don't take care of the environment in the future, that all these commodities that we trade are going to disappear, or the growing areas are going to be significantly reduced if we don't take action some years ago. And since we didn't do it now, So I would advise the EU Commission to identify key players in several supply chains, speak to them, get their inputs, and then be able to, sharpen these regulations according to the area of the commodity that is being traded.
And also per sector.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to divide the sectors. I think the difference in just, for example, coffee and soy is just too great in order to being under the same regulation. Also the same punishments, obviously, the same requirements. I feel that the lens that the EU Commission is looking through is quite universal, and you could have taken different approaches to the commodities that you're trying to put under the EUDR by just simply speaking to key players in these supply chains. Yeah, I mean, I'm just starting in the whole EUDR regulation, taking a deep dive next week when I will be meeting the team of Sunheads. They have prepared a couple of things that will allow us to start data collection, kickstart it, but also be quick when it comes to getting all the information that we need. So for me, I like this topic a lot because I feel that it has the potential to change have quite the impact at origin. I think we don't address premiums for origin enough. These guys are doing all the heavy lifting. We're putting all these requirements on them, but there's no bonus for them doing it. And if we as a European market want them to comply with rules, we should reward them for having those rules in place. And if the end result is a better climate and obviously a better world, and they're doing the heavy lifting, I feel that the discussion about premiums is coming way too short in all this.
Thank you.
No problem. You're welcome.
I hope this conversation gave you new insights into the EUDR and that you enjoyed listening to Michael. But of course, this was our conversation, and I'm actually keen to hear your thoughts about the EUDR and the implications in the industry. So please leave a comment, send a DM or an email, and we'll be happy to respond. You can follow us on LinkedIn or find us at Carble.co.